more creative, how do we tap into that creativity, and what are some things you can do? Because I can teach you skills. I can teach you how to draw. I can teach you how to paint. I can teach you how to, design things. But sometimes what students struggle with the most is coming up with ideas and being able to come up with those ideas and complete the work on time. And so we're going to talk about some of that today, and hopefully this will help you, and it will be posted for you to look at throughout the semester if you get stuck, or you need any more advice to get through the class. So the characteristics of creative thinking are being receptive, being curious, having a wide variety of interests, paying attention, seeking connections between things that maybe don't seem like they go together or they would have anything in common, having conviction in yourself, and then also trying to have a sense of complexity in your work and in your thinking. Looking at things maybe more than just the surface quality. So when we talk about being receptive, that means being open to new ideas. One thing that I have that I've encountered with students before is sometimes I have students that take these beginning classes like design or drawing one or painting one, and they tell me, "Oh, I'm already perfect at this." And although I realize a lot of you may have some really strong skills, and I'm excited to see what you do with those, and even to see some of your work that you've made before, you still need, you're in school. And even myself, I take classes. Sometimes I took a class this summer on how to be a better online teacher, and I learned so much stuff. I didn't go into it saying, "Oh, I've been teaching 15 years. I don't need any help." No, and I paid attention, and there were so many little tips that I had never thought of before. So you can always learn new things. When I was in graduate school, I have 2 degrees in painting and printmaking, and I took photography, I took sculpture, figure drawing, advanced drawing, art history, every class you could think of. But even after graduate school, I had a friend who started using encaustic paint, which is a process. And I had never gone to a school that had that, because it really is, I thought it was an outdated painting process. But one day I went to her studio, and she had told me she thought that I would like it. And that first day I went to her studio to play with painting with wax, is basically what encaustic is. I fell in love with it, and that first day I made 8 paintings with the encaustic process. So I think you always want to be open to new ideas. It's not going to hurt you. If anything, it's going to give you more to work with. And you can always say, okay, I tried that, but I don't really like it. But maybe down the road, you may have an opportunity to use some of those skills that you learned. Curiosity, that's the most important thing. When people talk about being really smart, a lot of times students talk more about the grades that people get. And when you finish school, there are no grades. What makes someone continue to grow and to better themselves is to be curious. And that's what we have. If you look at art history, we have artists like Leonardo da Vinci, who wasn't seeking a degree, who wasn't seeking to become rich. He was just a painter that had come from out of a working class because of his talents of art, and that gave him the opportunity to explore other things as a painter, because being a painter during the Renaissance gave him a little bit better of a lifestyle. So he began studying human anatomy. He began dissecting bodies to understand, what's going on in the inside of our bodies before even doctors or the medical professionals, which was the church at the time, before they were doing anything like that. He began trying to create flying machines hundreds of years before the Wright brothers. So, curiosity is going to take you more places than some pre-existing knowledge that you have. And so I always try to, be curious about how can things work better. Where have I not gone before? What else is something else that I could bring into, you know, um, into my skill set. So having a wide range of interests, I think, is also helpful. I think I told you all on Monday I take pictures all the time. It may be a grease stain on the street when I'm, walking at the end of the day, or it may be a flower, or it may be, another person's work of art. But I'm always looking for things that are visually interesting to me, and I keep them collected in like a little folder on my phone. And I think the same thing goes for, seeking more knowledge too. Whenever there are professional development classes offered at Northlake and Dallas College, I'm always like, if I have time, I sign up for them because I figure it will help, make things better. So I think if you may have something that you really like, but it's not going to hurt you to try to discover and explore new interests as well. Paying attention, I think that's the biggest part. Like I said, I take a lot of photographs, and when we were on campus at Northlake, one of the journalists for the newspaper one day was like, "I saw your Instagram, and you posted like 5 or 6 pictures of butterflies in one week. Like, there's no way you see that many butterflies. I think you're photoshopping them." And I was like, "No." I was like, "I go for a walk every day, and I will see a butterfly and I'll take a picture of it." And while we were talking about it, we were actually outside at North Lake by the lake, and we were sitting by on this flower bed. And right when I was talking to her, this like butterfly just like landed on my arm. And I was like, "See, I'm just paying attention all the time." So I think there's always exciting and interesting things that are happening around us. But a lot of times we're so busy, we're not really paying attention. And so I think if you just are a little bit more visually aware and looking at your surroundings, you're going to find more inspiration and more interesting things around you. Seeking connections, that's a big one. I think we maybe did that a lot when we were younger and we were trying to figure things out in grade school, what connects to what. And you probably heard the term like cross curriculum before, where you learned how different classes, work together. We even have classes like biochemistry, where it's multiple things that go together. Languages also all kind of, spin from the same characters that were first, created, and then they've just evolved, over time. And so most were based upon like pictograms that then slowly became these written languages. And here you can see a picture of the Rosetta Stone. A lot of people know that name as that software that helps you learn new languages really quickly, but it's actually a rock. It's a big piece of rock that was discovered during Napoleon's reign. Napoleon had sent some of his troops to ancient Egypt to excavate some of the ruins. And as they were excavating this area by this river, they found this little rock. And they could have just been like, "Oh, there's just an old rock with carvings on it." But as they looked at it closer, they noticed that there were 3 types of script. There was Greek, a kind of Greek hieroglyphic combo, and then Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, you may be like, "Well, so what?" Well, the cool thing about that is that we didn't know how to read hieroglyphics at the time. And so, but we knew how to read Greek. And so, because there was that middle language, uh, these experts were able to look at them, and then they were slowly able to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so now they're able to be understood. So, if people aren't paying attention and they're not seeking connections between different things, then, there's a lot left that's not understood around us. So I think that, again, paying attention, looking for these connections will help you, I think, have more aha moments as you're creating and just in life in general. Now, conviction, that has to do with valuing your own skill set and knowledge that you have already, your own ideas, your own vision. And as artists, we all feel that way. And but like we talked about on Monday, sometimes as artists or designers or students, we don't always get to select, our projects. But there's usually always a way that you can kind of still have yourself and in what you make as well, in most cases. So don't, we're not asking you to get rid of anything that you already have, but how can you use that with things things that you're learning, the new things that you're inspired by, the new things that you're having connections with. So always, kind of value that too. And this is a painting by the artist Frida Kahlo. She was a artist that lived in Mexico most of her life, in the early 1900s, up until the mid 1900s. And she became pretty famous in her lifetime, uh, for multiple reasons, because of her art and also just because she had a very inspiring story. There is a movie about her that came out in the early 2000s called Frida, and Selma Hayek plays Frida Kahlo. And there's an interesting story about why Selma Hayek played Frida Kahlo. A lot of people think of Frida Kahlo as being fully Mexican, but she actually is half Middle Eastern, half Mexican. Her father was a Jewish man who came to Mexico during the World Wars to escape a lot of what was happening in Europe, and he came there and met her mother, and he changed his name, and he had all daughters, and Frida was one of them. And so she had this really awesome opportunity to grow up, hearing the different cultures from her father's side and her mother's side, and learning about everything, speaking multiple languages. And she had a really rich knowledge. Her father was also a photographer, so I imagine that creativity, was kind of instilled in her early on. And she had so much promise. And however, when she was a child, she developed polio and she almost died. And it caused one of her feet to be smaller than the other. And later in her life, she actually had to have it amputated because it just always caused her problems. Polio, we don't see too much in the United States anymore because there's a vaccine for it. But I know one of my uncles, he had it when he was a kid, and he's got one leg is shorter and one of his feet is smaller. And so he has to buy shoes that are like two different sizes. But Frida had that. And then when she was a teenager, she was riding on a trolley throughout town one day, and another vehicle collided with the trolley, and several people on the trolley died in the accident, and Frida was severely injured. One of the handrails that she's holding onto actually broke off, and it went through her stomach and pierced her uterus and came out her back, piercing her spine. And she broke like all sorts of bones in her body, and they didn't think she was going to make it, but somehow she survived. But she was in a body cast for a long period of time, and throughout her remaining life, she had to have multiple surgeries. She had to have her spine reset. She was in a body cast a lot of times, and guess what she wanted to do? Paint. She would lay in bed. Her parents figured out a way to put a mirror above her bed so she could do self portraits to practice. And then they made an easel that went over her lap, kind of like a TV tray, or like the things that you know, I don't know what it's called, but they bring you like breakfast in bed or whatever. And she would paint while she was in a body cast. Sometimes she would even paint her cast. And if you go to her house, which is now a museum close to Mexico City, it's called La Casa Azul, or the Blue House. You can visit, and they have a lot of those items that she had, and you can tour it. It's pretty cool. But she survived, and she was painting. And I say that because we're so quick to say, oh, I can't do that, I can't do this. And when I hear these stories about these artists that have lived through the hardest times, the most painful times, and they chose, to continue to make art, it just always empowered me as a student that I can keep going no matter what happened. And sometimes when you're going through these hard times, it's kind of when you make your best work. And the same thing goes for other types of art too. I mean, we see movies made, music made, all about really horrific or challenging times, but people make something beautiful from it that inspires other people. And Frida Kahlo did just that. She wrote about her life. She illustrated her life in her work, but then she also really put a lot of what was going on around her in the social and political world at that time in her work as well. So I won't tell you anything else about her life, because if you want to watch the movie, I don't want to spoil the whole thing for you. But she was a very inspiring person, and that's why so many people really enjoy her story and her life, because she just really continued to excel throughout the hardest of times. Now, complexity, that's combining things and making them a little bit more interesting and more complex. A lot of times we were talking about on Monday that sometimes people can make really visually pleasing designs or pieces of art, but if there's no content to it, it's just a pretty picture. Sometimes maybe it took a lot of skill to do it, but I think I'm always attracted to artwork that has a story, artwork that has emotion behind it, artwork that makes me think, artwork that makes me question things. And so one of the ways we can do that is by combining different things together and making our work more complex. So this just talks about some, words that maybe are quite opposite. That what if your piece of art kind of showed more than one side or more than one thing to consider? Now, goal setting is going to be very important in this class. I've kind of set those goals for you with how we're going to work week to week. Some assignments, if you look at the syllabus, you'll see that you'll have more than a week on, just because I know that they're more challenging. I really don't want to accept late work, because as an artist or as a designer, your clients aren't going to accept late work. They're going to give the job to someone else that does it on time. So even though these are soft skills, you really need to learn to make deadlines. And at a university, they're not going to be sensitive to any excuses or things like that. Even though stuff like that comes up, I know sometimes you just have to power through and manage your time better around some of those things that happen. There are emergencies, and those things I will handle from a person to person basis. But for the most part, we're going to try to stay on track and keep going forward. If you get behind with this class, I would say instead of worrying about what you missed, just pick up where you are and then get back on track and keep going forward, because it's not going to slow down, and you're going to need to move on, or you're going to be continuously behind in the class. All right. So give me just a second. Let me deal with my dog. Sorry about that. We're still getting used to working from home. All right, so the characteristics of good goals are things that are challenging but attainable, compatible with what's going on in the rest of your life or maybe your other classes, things that you can control, that you're not depending on someone else for, things that are clearly defined and that are temporary. So, and like I said, I've kind of planned this class. I've taught it for 15 years, so hopefully we can stay on track, and I'm here to help you do some of that stuff. So when I say things are challenging but attainable, that means don't set yourself up for things that are too challenging. Sometimes I'll have students say, I know the paper is 14 by 17 inches, but I want to do a piece that's like 6 feet by 6 feet. And I'm like, I love that. I would love for you to do that. But, maybe you can do a small one for this class, and then, on winter break, you could do the big one. So you always want to try to, make sure that you can have great ambitions, but sometimes things may be a future project when you have more time. Okay. So you want to make sure that you can achieve your ideas and that's why having a sketchbook is so important, because if you have these bigger ideas, you can write them down and come back to them later. Compatible, like I said, I know a lot of you are probably taking multiple classes. You may be caring for other people at home, helping to teach your children and stuff too. I'm sorry, just a second. No.
going. Did they get
Yes.
the contour?
Sorry about that. All right, so make sure that you have compatible goals that work with everything else that's going on. So avoid goals dependent on someone else. We're not going to do any group assignments in this class. The only thing that we'll do that really will be a group assignment is like the Padlet post where you'll be commenting on each other's work, or you will, and also for the group discussion board when we have you'll be submitting assignments and then you'll have to critique each other's work. But that's not really, the actual project will be just up to you. So I've tried them before, but people work at different paces, so it's a little challenging. But I have had students before not be accountable for their own deadlines, and before I've had students in class that were very maternal or paternal to the other students, and they would be like, hey everybody, don't forget this is due, and things like that, when it really wasn't their job because they were a student in the class too. And I've had times before where one of those students would tell the rest of the class, oh no, I don't think this is due now, it's not due till later, and the other students listened, and then they all turned in their work at the wrong time, and these students were mad at that other student, and I'm like, no, that's your fault, you should have looked at the syllabus, you should have asked me. So try to, you're a grown up, you're in college, even if you are taking this as a dual credit class. When you're in a college class, we see you as an adult, so you're still responsible just for yourself. All right, so make sure your goals are clearly defined and that you hit your target goal. Make sure you have temporary goals. Like I said, it's probably best to just move on to the next project if you miss something. We're going to do 8 big projects, so you'll have plenty of opportunities to raise your grade if you miss one, and there will be some little easy point kind of things that you can do for to kind of raise your grade from time to time. Time management, that's I think the hardest part for going online with students. And you all need to realize when I give you these assignments and you have to work from home, if we were meeting face to face, which this course has never been taught online before. So when we met face to face, this class was from Monday and Wednesday from 9:30 until 12:15. So we were in class for almost 6 hours a week. And then the students had to do their homework. Most of the time, what they couldn't finish in class, they would have to do at home. And a lot of times that would mean, putting the finishing touches on their project, finishing their sketchbook assignments at home, and then showing up to class on time. So you need to realize, like I don't know, some of the stuff making it a little bit more simple because it's online, but this is not a class that you can spend 5 minutes a week working on. You're going to have to really manage your time more since you're working at home by yourself. So we're going to talk about some of these steps to help better manage your time. You get to choose when and where to work, and that is a real challenge. You can see my dogs are bugging me right now. I promise they're spoiled. That's why they're not in need. They've already ate. They've already gone outside. They're just spoiled. They think when I'm home that we should just be doing fun stuff all the time. So you may need to find a place work. This is a little bedroom I have that I turned into like my office / art studio where I make my art. And I have not always had one of these. I've lived in 1-bedroom efficiency apartments before where my studio was the kitchen floor and I would put trash bags down. I've lived in places before where I couldn't work inside because, I wasn't allowed to, or I was afraid I was going to make a mess, and I would be on my patio or balcony, painting. There were times that I had to go to like a park and sit on a park bench and make art, so you really have to kind of find a place that works for you. And, sadly, there's not an ideal place, for everyone to do that. So you may just have to find, your own place. For years, I had like a TV tray, like like the little fold out tables. And that's all I had really to make art on. And I would just, put plastic down on the floor, sit on my couch and I would do whatever I could, just working on top of that. And even though I have like a little studio bedroom office thing now, sometimes I still find myself doing that just because that's what I did a lot when I was in college. You also need to prioritize. You don't really necessarily have to make a list for this class, but you may have other classes. And I've heard one of my sisters teaches high school, and she's found that her high school students are better when they actually write things down. And so she's been having them get those day planners that people used to use. That's like a little calendar book, and she has them write down all of their due dates for the whole year and things like that to help them better prioritize. Because when it's on our phones and our other devices, we can't really always see bigger picture, and sometimes we don't look at our phones, all day long. So I think having something physical like that, or using even the class schedule that I made for you and writing down other due dates for other classes on that, it may kind of help you see when things are most urgent and when your last minutes are. But I'll also be sending out reminders for you. Seeing the big picture, I just said that. For this class, the sketchbooks are kind of the more minor thing. The projects are going to be weighted more in terms of a grade. But to do the projects, sometimes the sketchbooks will help you understand how to do the projects better. Work sequentially, like I just said. If you do the sketchbooks first, that's going to help you better understand the project. And sometimes the sketchbook is planning for the project. So sometimes students will be like, well, I'm just going to do the project, but then they don't really understand it and they miss some of the content that they're supposed to include. So, try to stay on track, work sequentially, and you'll be better. Use parts to create a whole, break down big jobs into smaller parts. If you have limited time and space to work, there may be something, that you can do that, where you may not be feeling, let's say, inspired, but maybe you just paint the background that day, or maybe it's cutting that day for, we're going to do a paper cutout. Maybe one day you cut the paper and then one day you glue it down. So sometimes you can kind of write down steps. And I think if you prioritize steps, then that also gives you a plan to follow along with, and you're not just scrambling, at the last minute. Since we don't really have class time this one, I'm just going to skip. I'm sorry. I wish we were face to face again. But on the other side, I've had some students tell me since the summer when I taught drawing that they had always wanted to take an art class, but they never could because of their work schedule. And so having the classes online actually gave them the time to take the classes online. So I think it could kind of go either way with that. A slow start is better than no start at all. Sometimes you just have to jump in. And then the last one, this is my favorite, when in doubt, crank it out. You've all probably stayed up all night studying for a test. You've all probably stayed up all night working on a paper that you had to write. I've done that so many times. I still do that with work that I have to do and projects that I have to do on committees for the college. And I do that with art too. I can't remember if I told this class or another one, but the other day I was asked to enter this group exhibit at this museum in Tyler, Texas, and I've been in the show for the last, I think this will be my fifth year. And I knew one of the paintings that I wasn't going to be able to finish it just because I had so much going on at work. And I sent in the one entry, and they were like, we thought you were going to do two. And I said, yeah, I just can't finish it in time. And they were like, well, what if we give you one more day? Can you finish it tonight? And so I was like, you know what? A museum is asking me to put another piece in. I'm going to stay up all night. So I literally started working at like 9 o'clock when I finished all my work for Northlake. And I worked from like 9 p.m. until like 5 a.m. like to just finish this painting for that show. And then sure enough, they liked it and they said, yeah, send them both to the museum. So sometimes you have to, kind of do that. I know it's probably not healthy, but it just depends on what your goals are. And, sometimes you have to sacrifice other things in order to, reach dreams. So reducing stress and blame, I'm here to help you learn, and I'm also here to challenge you and to prepare you for what it's going to be like at a university. And so I would say try not don't focus on whether I'm mean or I'm giving you too many assignments. I'm just here to help you, and I can't just dilute the assignments and things like that because we have hard lives. That's not really how life works. So, if you chose to take the class, to earn the credit for it, you have to choose to do the work. So the blame really becomes your own. Are you going to do this? Do you have what it takes to do this? Are you going to use the resources available to do this? So try not to blame. Just try to focus on the task and do your best. That's mostly all we're asking. I already said this. Like try to work on the solution. And the more that we've been online, especially I'm on several committees that work with some of the higher administrators at Dallas College, and one of the things I heard one of them say the other day is, since we're all working online, the last thing that most people want is to be in another session like this or a meeting like this using Teams or WebEx or Zoom, where it's just a bunch of people complaining. Because we're hearing that at home with our families and our dogs barking and everything like that, our babies crying, stuff like that. So they said what we want are people that have solutions, because that's all we're really focused on right now. And I think that's really a great way to look at things is, do we want to work with people that have solutions or people that just have more complaints and problems? So try to shift your way of thinking of, instead of whose fault it is, why you don't like it, why it's not going to work, how can you make it work? What can you do to salvage it? And try to think more that way, shift your thinking. Keep your balance. Remember to take breaks. This is only one class and one assignment. It's not the one thing that's going to mark the rest of your life. Whenever a student doesn't complete something or doesn't do their best, I never assume that they don't care or that they're a bad student. I never think that. I've been working full time since I was 15. I started out washing dishes illegally at a family-owned pizza restaurant, and I would wash dishes for 8 hours a day, sometimes without a break, depending on how busy we are. And I still have back problems because of it, because I was just bent over a sink, just scrubbing pizza pans for hours at a time. And so I would get home at like 11 o'clock at night, if that, when I was in high school, and I would stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning, studying and things like that. And my parents made me play sports, and I was really involved in working. And to me, when I think back to that part of my life, it was so much harder than it is now. But now it makes me feel like I can do pretty much anything. But there were classes I took where I didn't get an A. There were assignments that I just was so physically exhausted. I was like, I can't do it. And so we can't be perfect at everything all the time. And so just try to keep your balance and do the best that you can. Communicate with me, and hopefully everything will work out. Now, we're going to shift kind of more to the creative side now. How do we pull creativity? Where do we pull influence and inspiration from? And that we'll see with this class, especially probably more online, since we're not seeing each other work each day in class. We're going to see quite a variety of ways that people interpret projects. And a lot of the projects, I'm going to give you a few rules, a couple of guidelines, and a few examples, and then it's really going to be up to you with what you do. So we'll probably have a wide variety of imagery, content in the work. And if yours is different, that's good. Like we don't want everyone's the same, which sometimes that happens when it's a beginning class and everybody's working together, in one of the classrooms at Northlake. We tend to have, sometimes students will all be like, oh, I like what they're doing. Can I do something like that? And so I think this class will actually make us all kind of do things a little bit differently, which should be, really interesting. So some people are more inspired by nature, the physical world around us. That's more natural, where some people are more inspired by culture, which has to do with our society, the things that are man-made, the ideas that create and things like that. And then some people kind of pull from both. So like I said before, you may have someone in this class that, you know, their projects have like a social or political message behind them, where other people may have things that are just more visually delightful images that, you know, deal with the design and design principles and elements, you know, appropriately. So we'll have a variety of ways that people take some of these assignments. Another thing is some people look through themselves, and the work they make is more of a self-portrait or a self-expression. I can't remember which artist said it. I think maybe it was Frida Kahlo that said, like, everything you do is a self-portrait, whether you realize it or not, because you tend to put something about yourself in it. And some people don't like to do that. So a self-portrait means that it's a reflection of you somehow. As the artist, a portrait is of someone else. Okay, so sometimes I have students that are like, I did a self-portrait of my sister, and I'm like, that's impossible. So a self-portrait is of you, a portrait is of someone else, and it doesn't always have to be realistic. It could be abstract, it could be emotional, it could be symbolic. So there's a lot of ways that you could look into what a self-portrait is, or even what a portrait is of someone else. But you know, we can always pull from our own experiences to make our art. Looking at art history and art made by others, as we talked about on Monday, you know, very rare are we original 100%. I mean, we go and buy art supplies. That's not original. You know, the original artists, they made them, right? So we're nothing that we do, we're always influenced by what people have done before, whether it's the tools we use, the materials we use, the imagery we use, the different categories that we follow. So it's okay to pull from that. You just never want to directly copy and put it out there as your emulation is one way to learn, and that's when you study someone else's work and you try to recreate it similar to them. But usually we would call that like a master study or an ode to that artist. So what's plagiarism is when you find an image online, copy it, and then turn it in like you did it yourself. And I do Google image search your assignments, and you will have to show photo. You'll for your projects, you'll have to take pictures with your projects to prove that you made it. So you know, it's always to you know, try to be as original as possible and make your own stuff, like, for sure. So the subject of a work of art, that's the what of the work of art, like what is the subject matter that's used, the imagery that's used. Some artwork doesn't have imagery, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So the three main visual categories of art, and these are important words that you will need to understand because we will, assignments you have will use these words. And so I've had students before when I gave them an assignment that said make a non-representational project where they've used imagery, and that does not use imagery. So you need to make sure you understand these. And I forgot to tell you, under the folder where this PowerPoint is, there is a vocabulary sheet too that you can print out or download that has all these words defined. Okay, so the three visual categories of work, these are not categories of art. So like we have like pop art and Renaissance art. These are not eras and movements. These are visual categories. So it doesn't have anything to do with what was going on in the art world. It's just how it looks compared to the real world. So representational work means that it is real looking. So it almost looks like it's real life. Okay. Sometimes you hear people call that realism, but I don't really like to use that term because realism was actually a movement in the 1800s that depicted the hardships of the working class. So, you know, that can be kind of confusing when people use that term, what you're really talking about. Abstract means skewed or altered from reality. And so that means it's something that has images in it, but they're distorted somehow. Maybe the artist chose to change the color that's to make it not natural. Maybe they exaggerated the texture. Maybe they exaggerated the shape. Maybe they exaggerated the movement or motion. So there's a lot of ways we can abstract imagery. And so there's a wide range of visual art that could be considered abstract, from something really subtle to like a filter to something extreme like a Picasso painting from his later work. And then non-representational means there's no images. So it relies totally on the elements of art, the visual elements, line, shape, color, texture. A lot of times people are really quick to judge that type of art, and they say that anybody can do that. But think about music. Do we say the same about instrumental music? No, some people think that instrumental music is better music with lyrics. And so why do we say that about visual art? Both take skill, right? They really do. Especially if you try to make non-representational art and you try to make it look good, you realize that there is skill involved. Most of the artists, and I'll tell you how all this came about. So up until the 1900s, up until like the late 1800s, early 1900s, everything everybody did was mostly representational. And then we had a few artists like Picasso, some of the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists like Monet and Van Gogh that started using looser brushstrokes, working with palette knives and really thick texture. Then to Picasso, who started totally playing with shapes and forms in a different way. And so, of course, we came up with the word abstract. But then in the mid 1900s, artists that were formally trained to do portraits and landscapes, and they had all the skill in the world, they started making artwork without any images. And those would be artists like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, so many, Cy Twombly. But what did they do? They started calling it abstract expressionism, because they would get rid of the image. And so that got confusing because people started calling was an image to begin with. And so that's slowly when people started using the word non-representational or non-objective. So you will see people call work without, an image abstract, but they're really kind of wrong. So it's up to us to correct them, right? Because it can be confusing. So I have some categories to show you, or images, examples to show you. So here we see this pipe painted by Magritte. It looks real. I mean, it looks, the value, the color, everything, it looks like a real pipe, but it's just a painting. And so underneath it in French, you wrote, "This is not a pipe," because it's a painting, but it's representational. It looks real. Here we see this landscape with this person in a boat. And it looks real, even though it may look like maybe it's from another time period. It looks real. The atmospheric perspective, the textures, the colors, it all looks very natural. Color photography that hasn't been altered, pretty representational. This photographer photographs celebrities and other people in the mainstream that without makeup, enough to just kind of show what they really look like. And it makes you realize that a lot of the magazines and stuff we see on the internet is actually abstract. And then abstract means it's been skewed or altered. Like I said, it's really up to each artist to choose how they abstract their work. There is a misconception for some people that they're like, oh, because I can't draw, I'm just an abstract artist, but that's really not how it started. Most artists were trained to be able to do whatever, everything, and then they chose to make abstract or non-objective work. So just because you may have a desire to, I make more abstract paintings, but I still draw and design, and I know how to do a portrait or landscape or, all those things. It actually empowers you, I think, to be more versatile as an artist when you kind of have that foundation to go from. Because what are you abstracting if you don't know how to really work? So this is some pieces by Mondrian, Pierre Mondrian. He started out working and creating more representational work, but then he didn't really like nature. And so as he had more freedom in his work, he started playing with texture and color. And you can see this tree almost looks like a Van Gogh painting, right? With all the thick texture and the weird colors, and the anatomy of the tree doesn't really quite look, 100% accurate. And then this is supposedly a painting of a tree too, and we can see these sort of leaf shapes and these sort of branch-like things. But if I didn't tell you it was a tree, this one could kind of go a little bit more non-objective. Right? So he slowly purged imagery out of his work to where he worked completely non-objective towards the end of his career. And I'll show you some of those works in just a minute. So even black and white photography is abstract. We do not see in black and white. So when we choose to take photos that are black and white or to put a filter on them, we're really abstracting reality. Now, I always have a student that's usually in the physical class that's like, what about a black and white keyboard, or what about a panda bear? And I'm like, okay, yeah, there's exceptions. There's not a hard line between each of these categories. So there are some, like I said, these are just some general categories to kind of help you somewhat categorize the different types of visual art we see. And then obviously this is a portrait by Picasso that's very abstract. And looking at it, it almost makes you question the skill, but then when you see the use of value and texture and line, and even a sort of suggestion of a space with the background, it almost looks like a corner of a room. Then you realize, like, well, this does look like it was made by a skillful artist, but he chose to do this. And the reason he did this was actually one of his mistresses, and he saw an exhibit of masks from Africa, and these Iberian masks that traveled through Europe when he was there. And it really inspired him. He had never seen anything like that before. And he just thought it was interesting how, in some of the more primitive or ancient cultures, that people wore physical masks to kind of embody a character that was different from how they looked. And he just thought, well, that's weird. People don't really do that anymore with a physical mask, but we act a certain way that maybe isn't really who we are. So he started painting people almost as if they have a mask on, or like we're seeing who they really are. And it makes you kind of think when you look at his work like that. Now, non-representational means that there's no imagery. And even though this may look kind of simple to some of you, it takes quite a bit of skill to do something like this. And also with some of these artists that became famous for this minimalistic or non-representational art, they did this in a time that no one had done this before. And so, a lot of that has been taken away for us nowadays because so much has been done. But there's always, they felt that same way back then until, people began taking risks. So these paintings are actually by Mondrian, and that was this guy here. So he went from painting trees to ended up painting rectangles and squares. And he only used the primary colors and black and white. And that's because he said he wanted to break down all visual imagery into like the basic design and visual elements. And so that's what he did. The primary colors make all the other colors, and black and white create all the different values that we see. And so he really did do that. And this influenced textile design, fashion design, architectural design, and everything started looking like this. From rugs to houses became very, geometric based. And so he really did sort of have a big impact on the world and design in general. Jackson Pollock, he was also an artist that studied working with imagery. He did portraits, he did abstract work, he did cubism, kind of like Picasso. And then one day he was painting and he dripped. And normally, you were taught that a drip is something bad, right? You're making a mistake, it's going to ruin your work. But I guess he saw some energy or movement in the drip, and he just thought, why does my canvas have to be on an easel? What if I put it on the ground? And what if I was like a conductor leading, this orchestra, and I just choose the color based upon my mood, and I make marks and sling the paint around with the energy that I want the work to have. And he did that, and nobody had done that before. And is this easy? Not really. I mean, it makes a big mess, and if you don't have a maid, you got to clean that up yourself. It also uses a lot of paint, a lot of energy, and these aren't just simple. Oh, I'm gonna drip this for 5 minutes. Like these are thick. If you've ever seen his work in person, I mean, it's layer upon layer. Some are almost like an inch thick of paint. And so these were multiple times that he was coming to these, and people were blown away by it. And some people really hate his work. Some people really love it. Some people are upset because it's worth a lot of money. He died a long time ago in a car accident. So, now it's really not so much about the money or him anymore. But I just try not to think about the money side of art because a lot of that's just really distorting. And when artwork sells for millions of dollars, I have a hard time believing that there's not laundering and things like that happening because it doesn't really, to me, seem like it's really about the art anymore at that point, but it's more of an investment for people, and that's not really why most people make art. So I would always try to focus on, taking the money part out of it and try to focus on, the soul and what's being expressed in it. But Jackson Pollock, this is what really made his career. The next thing he was, super famous on the cover of Time magazine. And part of it was because of the controversy, because it did seem fairly easy for other people to do. And there have been a lot of artists that, have sort of mimicked his style and things like that through over time. Now, so those are the three visual categories: representational, abstract, and non-representational. We talked on Monday about form and content and how that's the visual components of art and then the message or meaning. And, we want to always try to have both. Some of these assignments we have, I get it, you're going to get tired. So you may not always have a lot of content, but, whenever you can put a little more thought into it, I just think art's always better when there's content. Even if the skill set's not there, sometimes that story just helps us connect with it more. And so, I would say always try to pull that from somewhere. Now here, just to show you how form and content are related. If the form is different, the content's going to be different. And a lot of people don't see this because we don't really pay attention and we're not really always seeking connection. Some of those skills that we talked about on how to be more creative, both of these are sculptures. Both of these are three-dimensional. Both of these are carved from stone. However, visually speaking, in terms of form, this one on the left is very organic, and the anatomy looks a little bit more idealistic, like almost, a higher way of looking than most of us do. The one on the right looks very abstract and has a very more geometric sort of shape to it. This one looks very detailed in that, you can see things like the fingernails, texture in the hair, where this one looks really simplified, where the hair is really just a repeating pattern that almost looks like yarn or something like that. So the form and the content are, the form has similarities, but also is quite different. The content, though, a lot of times I have students, they're like, these are the same. They both express love. And I'm like, not really. If I were to put these in my grandma's house, she would put a blanket over this one so that we wouldn't look at it, right? This one she would probably put in her garden because she thought it was decoration. The content's not the same. This one is very sensual. It's very provocative, where this one is very simple and it feels a little bit more innocent or playful. Almost like me caveman, you cavewoman, let's reproduce and make future civilizations. It's very different compared to this one. So, but if you just look at it, oh, they're both kissing, it's love. You're not really getting it. And so I want you to see that how we each, how much content, how much, effort you put into the form, it's going to play how people perceive your work. I don't think anyone will ever look at this statue the same way that they will look at this statue if they're not side by side. All right, same thing with painting and other forms of art. These are some paintings of flowers by Georgia O'Keeffe. She did a lot more than paint flowers, but a lot of people know her for this because they just became so popular during her lifetime. But she was an American artist that lived in New York and New Mexico, and she loved nature. And she wasn't necessarily like really into flowers or super feminine things. She actually painted a lot of desert scapes and skulls and things like that too. But she loved complexity of form. And she said that one of her quotes is something like that she hated that people took the beauty of a flower for granted just because it was small. And so she started painting these huge flowers that were cropped. So you couldn't really tell it was a flower. And that made people use their imagination, and they would see other things, or they would think it was, abstract or even non-objective at times, but it actually was a flower up close. And so they're very sensual, very beautiful. The colors are really rich. Van Gogh also painted a lot of flowers, and a lot of his feel really kind of sad and depressed. And so I wanted you to see two artists painting flowers, but they have totally different content. They make you feel a different way. These flowers on the right by Van Gogh, they look like they've been murdered, like there was a drive-by and they just are dead and they're waiting for the coroner to show up. I mean, it looks very painful and sad. The texture, the color, lifeless. Like it feels depressing. Where normally we think of flowers as something that brings us, joy. And so, artists, we really have the opportunity to choose how we want to use imagery. And so, when you see something that normally makes us happy, looking sad, it almost makes you more sad, right? And so, there's always ways that we can add content to our work. Iconography and symbolism is one way. We have historical, religious, cultural, and then personal symbolism, and a lot of pop culture symbolism. And so there's always ways that we can look for those or add those things to our work to kind of add another context to it. And we see this a lot in pop culture. You've all probably watched a music video before and realized that they were referencing something else. So these are just some examples of that. We can see this is obviously a wedding portrait because it's from today, right? Or it looks like sometime recently. We recognize it as a wedding portrait because of the dress, the bouquet, the kiss. They're at a church. But looking at this one, you may not have thought this was a wedding portrait because this was a painting from 1434. However, it was a wedding portrait. This woman is holding her dress up to look like she's pregnant because having children during the 1400s was very important. And so, as part of the ceremony, they would hold their dress up like that to make it look like they were with child. And they wore green to symbolize fertility and offspring. The dog is also in the painting because a dog was a symbol of fidelity or faithfulness. That's where the dog name Fido comes from, which used to be a really popular dog name. This dog also, because it was painted so realistically, art historians have determined it to be an often pinscher, which would have had to be imported to Europe. So it also kind of becomes a symbol or an icon for wealth that they had money to import dogs. We see some shoes discarded on the side of the room. This was because they were on holy ground, because it was a wedding, and so it shows respect that that God is watching, and that they're doing this, under God's eye or whatever. And then the window, you can see fruit in the window ripening. And that's also a symbol of fertility that hopefully their marriage brings them children. And then the mirror in the background, that's a symbol of God's eye that witnesses everything. And then you can see there's some writing on the wall and this beautiful chandelier. This was in 1434, so before electricity, before any painting classes. This was before Leonardo da Vinci. So this was the early Renaissance. And the artist was Jean van Eyck, and a lot of people believe he was the first oil painter ever, and that he may have invented oil paint. So imagine if you just invented a type of paint before, any electricity, before, any modern things, before any artist had ever painted like this. Do you think you would paint this well? It's really impressive. Like that's why we call a lot of these artists throughout history masters, because they created the paint, they made their own paint, and then they made artwork that's just way ahead of their time. So he painted all of this from observation. So he didn't have an iPhone that he could take a picture and zoom in later and work from it. He couldn't print a picture to look at or use a projector. Like this was all from observation. And when you zoom in I think I have some zoom in parts, look at the level of detail. And again, he made his own paint. He invented oil paint, they believe. And so how he did this, it's just impressive. And this painting is really small. It's not even that big. But look at like the braids in her hair, the different textiles. You can almost feel the textiles, but it's all flat. Like he just manipulated the values and things to look real. And then here we see that chandelier. Look at the mirror up close. You can actually see the different stations of the cross and the little eyelet decorations on it. And then in the reflection, you see the bride and the groom, the priest, and the artist. Like he painted the reflection. How he saw that across the room, I have no idea. And then up close, you can see he wrote Johannes van Eyck was here 1434. Now that was his name, the artist's name. And if you go back, it's right in the middle of the painting. Now, I know nowadays a lot of people get wedding photographs made. Do you want that logo for the photographer right in the middle? Probably not. So it's kind of rude, right, that he wrote I was here in the middle of their painting. Well, this did not only serve as a memory, he was their witness. So he signed this saying, I witnessed their marriage and I was the person. Just like today, if you get married, you have to go to the justice of the peace and you have to have a witness. That he was their witness. So this is their wedding certificate and their a portrait of them. So it's pretty cool how they did things back then. And that's just the dog up close. I had to show you because it was cute and a lot quieter than my dogs. So we're going to be working all two-dimensional in this class. So if you hear me use the word picture plane or composition, I'm usually talking about like the surface in which you're going to be working. These are the elements that we're going to go through. As we go throughout the class, some of these will combine together for projects like space, time, and motion. And shape and mass will combine together. But some of them like line and color and texture will be working with projects for each of those. So these are all things you should know, but you may not have explored each of those elements to their full potential. So I'm just going to skip over some of this. And you could go back and read through this, but it just says that we're all affected by each other's designs. We all are working with the same elements and principles, but it's how we put them together differently that makes our work unique. This talks about how composition and design are differently. We talked about this, I think, Monday. Composition refers to two-dimensional art only, and how we work within a canvas or piece of paper or a wood panel, whatever it is we're working on. Where design can be a verb or a noun, and it can also describe three-dimensional art as well. So I think I said that already. There are no rules. So a lot of times you'll hear me say guidelines or exercises. So it's really whatever you want to do. But sometimes, like I said, depending on if you're working for a client or not, you may not always be up for your interpretation. So you may have to meet certain needs or expectations depending on what kind of that you get. So you need to be able to communicate visually as best as possible. So why do we study these things? Because they help us understand the vocabulary better. They help us to be able to talk about what we see around us, and then they make us more sensitive and more open to what's all going on around us and the communication that is happening. These are the different principles of design. We'll work on these the second half of the semester, and these are more concepts. They're a little bit different, so they're more ideas, and so we'll look at these individually, and we'll be doing projects that have to do with some of these things the second half of the semester. And when we get to these, you're going to have a lot more freedom with those projects because I'm just going to be looking that you understand the concepts and that your work communicate those concepts. And then here it says, art does not need to be understood to be enjoyed. Like life itself, it can be experienced. But the more we understand what art can offer, the richer our experience of it will be. And that's really true. It's you can take art out and put in any word and of something that you're interested in. And the more you learn about it, the better it will be. So in this class, the medium or media, if you hear me using that term, that's the materials that you're going to use to create your work of art or your design. And medium is the plural, I mean, the singular form, and media is the plural form. So if I say I want you to make this project out of paper, I would say the medium is paper. But if I were to say I want you to use paper, paint, and markers, I would say you need to use the media of paint, markers, and paper. Okay. So media is more than one thing, and medium is one thing. And then sometimes you'll see artists put mixed media, and that could mean multiple things. That could mean that they don't want to list all the things that they use because maybe that's what's going to be in the book or the label next to the work of art. And so they just put mixed media. It could be that maybe they don't want to tell you what they use to make their work to kind of keep it a mystery, or maybe they just don't remember. So they just put mixed media down. And then style, that's another word that comes up quite a bit with art. And that means like your own artistic sort of influence in the piece. And we all probably have artists that we can recognize their work when we see it, and that's their style. That's what you're recognizing. So hopefully you'll start to see a style come up in your work. It's harder to see, I think, when you're first starting out, but then as you start to make more and more work, and as you see each other's work, you're going to start to recognizing it in each other's work throughout the class. And then this last slide, this is a painting I did years ago, and I just wanted to show you like how designs and ideas can come about and they can evolve. I had a friend that had gone to some of my family, a lot of my family is from East Texas, and they hunt and stuff like that. I don't, no offense to anybody that does, but it's just not something that, I was ever really interested in. But one of my relatives, I was at their, they were throwing away, I guess it was their targets from when they were practicing. And I just thought it kind of reminded me of the images that I paint, like these abstract figures. So I took one out of the trash and I was like, I'm going to collage that and make it part of my piece. But then I just thought it looked too violent. And I'm not really, into, I don't want my work to really promote violence or be violent. It's more usually the opposite of that. So I slowly was like, ooh, I don't really want to see that at all. So the painting ended up evolving, and the finished product, you can't even see that that's what's underneath there. But then I wanted to convey like just the idea of being kind of torn apart by love, and all the sacrifice and things like that. And so the end product had the same energy, passion, things like that. Even though I took away part of, maybe the more violent sort of symbolism that was in it. So your designs, I think it's always best to be kind of open to, having things evolve as you work on them. So that is the PowerPoint.